not really, I guess, a video on my life or kind of what's happening around me or a social issue. This is just something that I've seen that's annoying. So, for a long time, I've had interest in mountaineering, especially the 8,000 meter mountains, the 8,000 meter peaks. And there are a couple things I want to debunk because I keep seeing this and this is really annoying, right? So, when we talk about 8,000 meter mountains, there are there are what we call death rates. And so practically on every single list that you see on YouTube or every single climber that you see on YouTube summiting or trying to summit one of these mountains, they claim that there's a 20% death rate or there's a 15% death rate depending on which 8,000 meter that they're doing. There are 14 of them. They're all in Central Asia in the Himalayan mountains. So basically 8,000 meters above sea level or more mountains, right? Mount Everest is obviously the highest. So, of the 8,000ers. So what I see is I see all these lists, I see all these documentaries about these mountains and things like that, and they say, well, 1 out of every 4 climbers that goes on K2, or 1 in every 3 climbers that goes on Annapurna dies. And it's like, that's not true. Because what they're calculating the total number of summits to the amount of deaths. So if I were to say that a mountain has 400 summits and 100 deaths, it would have a 25% fatality rate. But in reality, that's not true, because we have to factor in all of the climbers that attempted and did not reach the summit, and in which case many of these mountains do not have good weather. They don't have good weather. They're often have very narrow periods where climbers can summit. They have very narrow time windows. Of course, you can attempt to summit at any time, although your chances of actually dying are much higher if you go on one of the summits, at 2 p.m. or 2 a.m. or whatever. But the point is, these mountains have, especially the ones that have worse weather, have very narrow time windows and seasonal kind of seasons, climbing seasons, and short-term weather that makes it most people not able to climb them. And plus, you're so high up that you like a lot of people, they get exhausted. They have to head down. So really what you're looking at is you're looking at the climber fatality rate to the amount of summit. You're not looking at every climber that goes up on the mountain and makes it to 7,000 or even 8,000 meters. For example, many people on K2 reach the bottleneck, but they don't get to the summit for various reasons. So this whole talk about there's a 25% death rate on K2, that's not true. That isn't true. Most of these mountains have a climber death rate of about 1 to 3%, right? I want to tell people this because I feel like it's also kind of harmful, because, I mean, obviously it sounds braggadocious, but I think it's kind of harmful to, like, mountaineering, for example, for people that want to try these mountains, because they're kind of terrified, they're kind of convinced that if they go up on these mountains, it's a death sentence. And yes, it's extremely dangerous. Yes, if you don't have the training, you will die. And yes, there are things out of your control like traffic jams or weather or avalanches that can kill you. But it's not literally you flip a coin and you die. It's not like that. Another one of the big kind of myths that I want to debunk is I see a lot of times that the 8,000 meter mountains are the most deadly in the world. Now, I'm sure that some of them are, but remember that there are a lot of fucking mountains on Earth, and there are a lot of mountains that people don't climb, right? So, if you actually take a look at 14 out of the million kajillion mountains, there are probably a handful of 6,000ers or 7,000ers with unbelievable weather or rock walls or things of the sort that would actually cause more fatalities than some of the 8,000ers, even though They technically don't have they technically don't have as high altitude, which is responsible for things like HAPE and HACE, or just exhaustion. Another thing that I want to say, so that's the thing. It's like we don't have enough records. We don't have enough information to confirm which mountain is actually the deadliest on Earth, right? There are probably a few of them are the 8,000 meters, just because it's 8,000 meters and they have snow and ice and it's so high up. And the human body has such a hard time dealing with those conditions. But I'm just saying, like, don't consider if it's 8,000, it's the deadliest. That's not how things are. One more thing I want to state is that I also don't believe the idea that Everest requires the most oxygen. Now, what do I mean? Well, technically, yeah, it is the highest. It's 8,849 and I think a third meter, right? But if you look at K2 or you look at some of the more technical mountains, so think about this. If you're on a treadmill, right? And let's say you're doing 8% incline. Now I know these mountains are much more than that, but let's say that you're doing 8% incline at 10,000 feet elevation. And you're doing 5% incline at 10,500 or 11,000 feet of elevation. Now, I know that the elevation number itself counts because less oxygen molecules are at those heights, as the molecules are centered closer to the sea level. But my point is that the terrain on some of these mountains, these 8,000ers, some of the smaller ones could actually probably require more oxygen than the taller ones, because the incline is so much more, right? I would rather go on a 10% incline at slightly higher elevations than like a massive incline at a lower elevation, slightly lower elevation. So less incline at higher, more incline at lower, right? So that's something I also want to challenge. I haven't heard much about that idea, that maybe it's not just the meters that matters, it's also kind of the terrain. It's also kind of the oxygen requirement itself, just from kind of the climb. Those are just 3 things that I wanted to share because I've always been interested in mountaineering. I won't be able to attempt any of the 8,000ers just because of POTS. Like, okay, the Appalachian Trail is one thing, but if you, like, POTS at 8,000 meters, I would die. And I know my body's limits that I would die. I would, in fact, die if I headed up any of them. So, that's all. I just felt like stating that. Have a good day, everyone.